name is Joaquin, and I'll be my IB candidate number of 0300130024, and I'll be doing a creative analytical IOP on the role of fear in the Green Mile. To start off, I want to give an explanation to what fear really is. Fear is imagination. So in literature, fear takes the toll of adding characterization, adding to why the characters do one thing out of the impulse of acting out. So this adds to the way of the transition from the post-colonial movement in literature, where protagonist, the anti-hero, is more prevalent. So this is an example would be in Hamlet and Shakespeare. And now what it does, it shows more emotion and shows flaws in the character that don't usually show up in the typical hero stories. To analyze the role of fear in the Green Mile, I'll be using references in the novel, giving inference to finding out what exactly is the character afraid of and why, and how that affects the plot. How the plot goes on through what the characters do. Starting out, it contributes to the plot, of course, but it starts off with more of a basis of how the nature of fear plays in the role of fear. It allows for the characters to give more insight into the characters, giving more emotion. Starting off, we're going into Paul Edgecombe. Paul Edgecombe has multiple fears. Here we see that he has fear of losing his job during the time of the Great Depression, which we see in the novel, repeating multiple times that jobs are scarce and the availability of jobs and security for the job isn't well fortified. And now we have Percy Wetmore, who right here is given when Paul enters the office of the Warden Moors, shows that with Percy's connections, he can deteriorate Paul's current status as a guard at the Green Mile. And later on, we see that his urinary tract infection shows that the character of Paul has gone through pain, suffering, and humiliation even, when in instance he shows that it gives him pain every time he has to go to take a leak. And even the part of the novel states that he had once pissed and falling into his own pee. And later on we see that Paul really has a struggle with battling moral and crime justice. We see that he doesn't want to take the life of John Coffey just because of the state law. We see that he wants to have a morally standpoint of how on the day of his judgment, when he stands before God, he asks me, why did I kill one of his true miracles? What am I going to say? That is my job. And he starts battling his morality versus his own nature of the job. With John Coffey, he has a fear of being an outcast, and that is shown with the symbolism of darkness. When in the text it shows that, do you leave a light on after bedtime, showing that he's afraid of the dark. The darkness would symbolize the unknown. The unknown can be known as sinning something that you do not know. So in that case, he would be set as an outcast. Also, with his longevity, he's been living long years. Through that years, he's gone living with his power of able to take in the pain and fears of others and feeling that maybe even amplified. And that just shows that later on in the novel, he decides to take a rest. With Percy Wetmore, we have more of a Napoleon complex where he wants more power, but he does not like to be looked down upon. So he desires to be seen, he is afraid of being seen as less of a man. He desires authority. In the text it shows that Percy is one of the few of the guards who requested to work at the Green Mile, which is something that's not normal. Percy's also very obsessed with his image. He has instances of where he's obsessed over his hair, and even reads magazines for a reference to how a man should act. As shown here in the quote, he must have read that in one of the magazines he liked so much. He probably had, Percy Wetmore is a great reader of Argosy and Stag and Men's Adventure. And in the novel, we see that Percy's state really deteriorates as he goes on, his image. As it was well portrayed in the adaptation of the film, it's shown above, where he has his hat on and his suit, which shows his authority and giving his image more of a higher standpoint, where later on his hair is even messed up and his hat is not even on. And he becomes to the point where he's inside the padded room with someone handing him a drink. not being able to control the actions done to him. Well, I have next is Warden Moores, who during the time of trouble, he goes through his wife's disease of her terminal illness of a brain tumor. This causes him to lose hope, and with his job being a warden at the guard, warden of the Green Mile, he shows that he has authority over others, and he really showcases this when in one case one of the prisoners attempts to attack him with a weapon, and he manages to control the situation, take down the criminal, and manage to even fit in a threat in there. Later on, we see that through the text, he shows that when he was explaining to Paul his wife's illness, he was showing that her hand trembles, and even when doing that, his own hand was trembling. And Paul immediately acknowledged that the Warden Moores was afraid of showing any inferiority, given that he had lost control. And the fact that he can't control the situation, unlike the contrast in showing control in the prison. Up next is Mr. Jingles. With Mr. Jingles, it really shows that fear humanizes characters, and in literature with Stephen King, the fear shows character development. And with that, Mr. Jingles is not human. And Mr. Jingles manages to walk up to the prisoners and even offer cheese. They offer him snacks. Mr. Jingles arrives and even eats the snacks. And when he does, it shows that he confronts his fears, but in fact, he doesn't have fears. These fears are not existent for Mr. Jingles. And Mr. Paul Edgecombe acknowledges this when he sees that the idea of having not leaving his mind, and again, it occurred to most that would feel that something so small approaching God's judgment after the seat of our lives were over, but not many of us would be able to look so afraid. And he's referring to how Mr. Jingles could walk up to the guards. With the plot development, we see that the action taken by each character is reflective of his fears. With Percy Wetmore, we see that when they're around with Delacroix, he beats him after showing signs of being gay. And Percy shows homophobia with that, saying that his image might be tainted with the idea of not looked down upon during the era. And his bond with Mr. Jingles is reflective of with Delacroix. It shows that Mr. Jingles is not afraid of Percy. However, Percy, having something so small around and not having fear, may have instinctively caused him to act out of fear. With Paul Edgecombe sees this in Percy, that he's dangerous to all the characters around. He sends Percy away before he manages to cause any more trouble. He sees Paul Edgecombe starts building a bond with John after he realizes that John is innocent. He didn't cause for all this to happen. And with John's visible sense of being lost, it shows that John has something that others don't, yet something that others do. It debates how John has this power of when he heals Mr. Jingles after Percy stomps on him, that Paul might be innocent. So this fear of having to deal with someone innocent having to be sent to execution causes for Paul Edgecombe to debate John's innocence and morality. In the next case, we have Percy Wetmore being assaulted by Billy the Kid. This happens when Percy's near the prison cells, and it causes for Percy to be assaulted and causes him to wet his pants. This has a humiliating effect on Percy Wetmore, and Delacroix, who was beaten by Percy Wetmore, shows signs of vengeance in his laugh, and Percy Wetmore wants to take revenge on this. He uses his connections to get closer to the execution of Delacroix. He even plans to use less saltwater solution in a sponge to put Delacroix in a miserable death. And later on, Percy Wetmore is put into a padded room after they attempt to take out John out of the prison, having him not wanting him to affect their plans. And later on, the novel also shows that he's put into the facilities of mentally impaired. Later on, we see John, in the beginning of the plot, show that he discovers the Diederich girls, and his show of the Diederich girls has an effect. So when he arrives there, he gets there, he's so afraid that these girls have gone through such pain and suffering that when he fears them after their death, he feels their pain, and even states that he came too late later in the novel when Paul confronts him. He asked if they leave the light on, which again refers to his fear of the darkness of being unknown. He heals Paul's urinary tract infection, he heals Mr. Jingles, and he heals Melinda Morris, who was going through the terminal illness of brain cancer. Later on, he begs Paul for rest, which states that due to John's longevity, he can't end his own life, being punishable. And for Paul, that's also debating how he's facing his moral and justice in the sense of the state law. And finally, we reach Coffey's execution. This states citation for the photos. And later on, using these fears from the reference of the novels, I'll be taking fear out of the equation and showing how, without the fear, the plot would develop differently. Isolating these key factors to show how important they are, and then stating my position on where and why the fear would take place. Here we start with Paul Edgecombe. Sometimes there is absolutely no difference all between salvation and damnation. Paul will no longer need to debate morality. If he has no fear of having to face judgment from God, he would have no problem facing problems that everyday people face when having to deal with morality. And later on it says that in the plot it would show that he would no longer need to get rid of Percy. Percy's just holding the law, and he would have no objectification against that. John Coffey would be treated as a lagoon with reference to how Percy would treat him. So reflecting how there would be a reflection of Percy and Paul without the use of morality. And now we see Paul more of an antagonist, switching roles with Percy, having to be an anti-hero. Now we see Percy's action. Percy would no longer harbor as much hostility. Percy would have the fear of having the Napoleon complex, which is being looked down upon by others. Here we see, as you know, he runs it along with the bar sometimes just for the pure hell of it. He's mean, he's stupid, I don't know how much longer I can take it. That's the truth. That's taken from Paul after Percy beats Delacour. This shows how Percy, facing his fears, he acts out in violence. He does this, and it's expressed by enjoyment to others, and that really shows how his fear really does show how he acts out. Also, he would be less attempted to prove himself. If he was less fearful of how others seemed to look at him, he'd be less felt to look like he would have to prove himself in terms of manliness. He would no longer be a great reader of Argosy and Stag and Men's Adventure. He'd use his connections to get a job somewhere else that wouldn't cause him to get in trouble with moral judgment by God. Percy would not be seen as a supporting character, seen to as the theme of the Green Mile being as you may not know who's innocent, yet they're all still doomed to execution. And then we see John Coffey here having his longevity. His fear of having to live long and go through all this pain and suffering is confronted, and he would no longer be tempted to rest as much, so he can focus on having more friends and having people who love him surround him. He then would find retribution in death by living. Any questions?
I like that you looked at how the impact, if you're focusing on how fear motivates the plot and character, and how does the absence of fear change the plot and character. Do you think that all of the narrative hinges on the role of fear?
Well, fear would only act as like a part of the motivation, while others, like not as such negativity would be sort of like desire would be more of a positive one. So no, fear is not the only one.
All right, good. Thank you.